one is, it's got a lot of meat to it. But there's a big pitfall on this PT, a huge one, okay? And that is that the question is, does it matter? Okay? What you are going to get lost in is talking about, should personal circumstances influence how seriously your knowledge is taken? That's not what they're asking. They are not asking whether personal circumstances should or should not impact how seriously your knowledge is taken. They are telling you that it does happen. Okay? They are giving the assumption that personal circumstances do affect. So I'm telling you right now, when the notes come in, after these PTs are sent in globally, there is going to be a huge misunderstanding of the vast majority of people talking about whether this is right or wrong, whether people should have their knowledge taken more seriously based on their personal circumstances. Because that's not what it's asking. But that word, it's the second part, personal circumstances influence how seriously knowledge is taken, is such a big and powerful statement to all of us that that's what we focus on. And we don't focus on the real question, which is, does it matter? Okay? So here's, and can you go to the, thanks, sorry. Everybody give a hand for Miss Valencia. This has been sort of brought upon her plate, and she's doing an amazing job. As Dunn and I sort of ramble on up here. So important, this statement is assuming that personal circumstances influence how seriously your knowledge is taken. It's saying that's what happens. So don't come in here and say, well, that's not true. Personal circumstances don't always influence how seriously your knowledge is taken. You're off. You're wrong. The whole PT is a disaster. Okay? It's not asking whether or not that's true. It's asking, does it matter? So don't write your PT about whether or not they do or do not. Focus on what it means that they do. Okay? Does it matter that this is the truth about the world? That's the question. Okay? So is it important that we are biased? Is what the question is. Okay? I think that one way to look at this is almost from a individual perspective versus an organizational perspective. Okay? As an organization, particularly in the public, but basically every organization now, especially those that deal with the public, right? You should all remember, because many of you are Starbucks addicts, and you probably had minor heart attacks about a year ago when they closed all the Starbucks for a day. You remember that? Raise your hand if you remember when they closed every Starbucks for what? Diversity training, right? Because there was an instance where a black man was discriminated against, and it was all caught on video, completely sort of incorrectly at the same time as a white man was given service, a black man was not, and he was asked to leave, seemingly for no other reason than the color of his skin. So Starbucks closed down operations. That's how big of a deal this was. Okay? So that was to say to you, yeah, it matters a lot. Okay? But I would go a little deeper and try to get to an explanation rather than a description, and say that, you like that? You see how I did that? That's the Cuban coffee in me right now. So I would say that think of it organizationally versus individually. Should it matter to you that people are going to take your knowledge more or less seriously based on where you're from? My thought would be that you should not let it affect you. right? Because if you look at yourself and you say, okay, here's the color of my skin, or here is my economic background, or here is my ethnicity, and because of that I know I'm going to be taken less seriously, so maybe I should not go for my dreams. Maybe I shouldn't try to be president or something like that, because it's not going to happen for me. And obviously I would say and I would hope that that wouldn't be the case. So in a sense of individual perspective, does it matter how that your knowledge is going to be taken less seriously? It shouldn't. Okay, you should try not to let it affect you. Now, if you're talking about an organization, does it matter? I would say absolutely, because you can have issues in your organization. Okay, so does it matter? I think the resounding response is yes, it matters. Okay. But how important is that based on either your A-OK or your individual situation? Let me put it to you a different way. One of the terms that we haven't thought of or spoken of today is personal versus shared knowledge. Okay? So does it matter that you have personal opinions in your own household of people of a certain membership or group? Yes and no. It probably won't matter unless your personal opinions get out of your house. Okay? Because we all have dealt with family members and families who feel certain ways about certain groups of people. And that probably doesn't matter a lot as long as it stays there and you understand the difference between the two. Okay, where it becomes an issue is if you don't understand that you are in a public environment. Okay, I think that's where it maybe starts to matter more. Okay, so different ways to look at that. It would seem that it should matter more in objective disciplines because those should be as free of bias as possible. There should be no bias in math. It's basically impossible to have bias in math, although I suppose once you apply statistics or something like that in terms of analysis of groups and trends and things like that, then it could be important. It should matter less in subjective areas such as the arts. Okay? Does it, so if you're in the arts, it should matter a little bit less that the way that the seriousness of your knowledge is affected by who you are or where you come from. I'll come right to you. A lot of times in the arts, the person's background is part of their art, and so it is sort of intertwined, and they want you. The artist wants you to take into account where they're from and who they are. Whereas in math, it's kind of the opposite, right? I want my numbers to speak for themselves, my formulas. Yeah, of course. What? Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a definite fair point. It does matter, and it should matter more maybe in subjective areas, and it doesn't matter and perhaps should matter less. I think I have the opposite up there maybe. When you do these things, you'll go back and forth, and that's kind of the idea when you're doing a PT. one of the reasons why PTs take more time, don't write this the night before. I know you will. Raise your hand if you're going to write this the night before. Yeah, okay. At least you're honest. At least you're honest. We'll talk about that at the end. It's due in 2 days, okay? It's due in 2 days. Does it matter when it's due? I could say it's due tomorrow morning. You would still all do the same thing. No, I work ahead of him. What is he talking about? It's due October 21st. Okay, we'll talk about that after. That gives you a month to not do anything and then do it all the night before. Yeah, man, that's awesome. That's how I live, bruh. All right, quiet down. We're going to get a couple last questions, and then you're going to be on a quick break. Go ahead. Yeah. Shh. I think absolutely. I think the distinction between personal circumstances in terms of background, professional background, is necessary. You want to get your information from an expert. And I think even beyond that, you could talk about certain personal circumstances should lend credibility when you're talking about certain subjects. How are you going to speak about the plight of finding adequate food in an African nation if you've never been to Africa? But yet many people will try to do that. So yeah, I think so. I think that you definitely should explore what does personal circumstances mean. And yes, I think, and an interesting point to say would be, yes, I think we can all agree that we should not, discriminate based on all of these factors, race, gender, those common factors. But then again, maybe you should in certain circumstances. I was watching, I think it was maybe a John Oliver, but it was talking about a medical condition that women have that basically they were attempting to understand this medical condition. I can't remember exactly what it was, but the idea is what happened was, in order to understand the condition, they did medical testing, clinical trials. But all of the participants in the clinical trials were men. So they couldn't understand, how are you going to ask men and test on men's bodies? It had something to do with ovaries. Okay? Like how do ovaries impact some kind of medication or something. And they tested on men. So this made no sense. So, flawed study, thank you. This was only 20 or 30 years ago. It was, men were sought out more as test subjects than women, because it was thought that women had, oh my God, she could be on her period and it'll throw everything off. So there were these biases that were inherent and flawed many studies. And in that case, you would say, no, you should have taken personal circumstances into consideration here. And it does matter that you didn't. Okay, and we'll go, we'll go 3 more. Real quick, go ahead, Todd.
Could you frame it in terms of Aristotle's ethos, Atlas and Logos, where you're talking a lot about ethos and how your credibility, your ethos is influenced by your circumstances, and then maybe your logos is independent of personal circumstances, but some people give more credence to your personal circumstances, your ethos, even though you might have more logical arguments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a nice way to frame it, because it does, and just even if you didn't want to go into Aristotle, you could just talk about reason versus emotion, and should those impact the way that you're thinking about those things. But that would be a good way, definitely. Typically, we try to kind of say don't go into philosophy too much, because IB is really about like, well, this is not a philosophy class. So we try to discourage that, but I think in that regard it would make sense, actually. Yes? Absolutely. I would say you're almost sort of saying street smarts versus book smarts kind of thing, right? What makes a real expert? Is an expert on, I don't know, on the NFL, an NFL player, or someone who has studied the NFL their entire lives? That's been an ongoing debate for a long time. Does it matter that you have experience, or does it matter that you are highly educated? And I think that's a very important distinction to make.
And it comes down to, I think, that same issue about true expertise versus proxies for it. We take shortcuts all the time. Some of those are justifiable, like citations. Some of those aren't, like discounting a mathematician's PhD because he's from a poor country. There's something more I have to say about this, and where it's floating around there somewhere. Okay, give me a minute. Oh well, if it comes back to me, I'll bark for the phone, for the microphone.
All right. Well, let's call it a break there, okay? Because we are up against it. You've got 5 minutes, okay? Because we don't have a lot of time.